Welcome to Lesson 11 of the 13-lesson series for Occupational Ed 4350. This is an unusual lesson in that it goes back and reviews some of the important things that you have already learned about the competency statements. At this point in time, we have gone over Lesson 10, which is a lesson that ties together the things in the portfolio which you have not completed. Your instructor may have given you some handouts during this course or mailed those electronically to you to assist you in tying the course together. Others of you have taken this particular presentation and used it along with live lectures. Whatever the way you have used these lectures, we hope they have been of benefit to you and that you have thought about your direction in the course as well as after the course is over. This lesson then today is reviewing competency statements or comp statements. We're going to hopefully assist you in improving them at this point. And so I'd like to go into initially some things about hints, and then we'll talk about those as best we can. You should have your 25 competency statements written at this point in time, but let's go ahead and review them and let you go ahead and self-assess. In other words, we want you to grade about the whole thing. Grade the whole thing that you've done. Make your own scores and determine, did you meet criteria that was outlined for you in this course. We're going to start out with first mentioning to you that you need to be sure that you follow the format. Now, in the examples that I show you in this group of slides, I'm not doing the format. I'm just going to be talking about content. But I do want you to go back and look at the format, how it is written, and I want you to follow that very carefully. But at this point, let's go ahead and begin some of the things about hints that we can use. First hint that you might want to look very carefully at: would a professional in your field believe that your knowledge base is comprehensive? Well, that one doesn't seem like much in itself, but I think it's important that you look at what you have written about your field. For instance, if you're a carpenter, a printer, or a soldier, or a person who's been in sales and marketing, would a professional who works alongside you look at that and say, this is written by a person in my field? What you want to have done is made yourself very unique. And as you go over your competency statements, and we've mentioned this before, to have another person help you go over them and look at them, would a person in your field read those and say, yes, well done, I believe that that's a professionally written document? And we will mention later, too, that this should be a document that is like a training manual. And I want to keep reminding you of that as we go further in that. So what professional would you use? I might suggest that if you look at your employment history and if you recognize someone there that is close enough where they could review them and look at those competency statements, this would help you tremendously. Because if a person was there in your office area or you had maintained contact with them. Now, we've talked about verifying competency statements through either civilian, military, or self-employment. But if you do have someone that you've worked for, as we mentioned, that maybe even you received a verification letter from, that person might be a good individual to look at the competency statements. You would certainly have to let them understand what the purpose was in the different areas. I know, or, you know, I can, and if I have all of these different elements of the competency statements, you'd have to let them know that we write those so that we can better view all of the students' work and it's organized where we can evaluate it. Now, remember that your instructor is going to evaluate the portfolio as he or she receives it and is going to score it at that time. You must have a score of at least 75 to be considered for evaluation. So you do need to do a good job, and this lesson will help you. So look for a professional in your field that you're writing about. Have that person review it. Now, my second suggestion, again, and hints, are the competency statements representing the more comprehensive atomistic skills you have. In other words, some students have done 50 competency statements or have written in their task analysis, maybe 35 or so atomistic skills, and then they say, oh, I think I better trim this down because I'm never going to be able to write all that information. So the students trim it down, and they leave in 25 competency statements or atomistic skills, and they realize that they have taken out some of their better atomistic skills. So my question is, could you have left in one skill that's a little bit higher level than the one that you left? So maybe you technically evicted one skill and you said, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't have put that one out. Go back and look and see what level these skills are on that you kept. Because some of you, we know, have already come up with 35, 36 atomistic skills, and we're only needing 25. So be certain that you did not remove a skill that should not have been removed. And I hope that you've kept plenty of backup documentation, all of this. Again, some of you hard copies, hard drive, CDs, etc., that you have kept. You kept them in different locations. Because as we said, as the time closes in on your end of the course submissions of documents, your due dates that your professor has given you, the more chance that your computer is going to crash. And we know that to be true. So be sure you have plenty of documentation, because your late portfolio is going to suffer late points, and that can hurt you in coming up with at least a 75 for evaluation. So be sure that at this time you're backing all these things up, and your changes you're backing up if you make those changes that we're talking about. So let me go back again. Are your competency statements representing the more comprehensive atomistic skills you have? That's important. That's hint number 2. Now, hint number 3 is the next one we want to talk about. Do each of your competency statements, you're going to read those, and what I want to ask you to do, did you read each of your competency statements starting from the knowledge base and working upward? In other words, go backwards. If I know, and if I have, I can. This should help you to see if you left something out. So in other words, a lot of students, if you can read from the end of the competency statements, that's a neat way to do it. If I know XXX, I can do so-and-so. If I have, you can put these in order and look at them, because starting with the knowledge base, you can see if the knowledge base is too narrow. Because if you've listed a knowledge base that's too narrow and you read up the line and find out, when I get to I can, that's not all I need to know to be able to do that skill. And you can immediately go back and correct it. And that's something that is very useful. So what we're saying is, again, go back to that competency statement you've written, read the knowledge base first, and go backwards and say, if I know, I can. Well, that will be something of high interest. Remember that the knowledge base is very important in our evaluation, because we're looking at what you do know, what you're stating that you know as far as the critical information in conducting that skill. So I think this hint number 3 is a pivotal type hint for you, if you can go back and review your competency statements. Now, some of you are kind of late here. You're writing those 12 midnight competency statements. Do the best you can to do what I just said here. I hope not. I hope you've kept up with the course and have done the work as we had in order, because we tried to get you started early enough that you could work on these competency statements early in the course after you started on your task analysis. So that hint 3 is one that I want you to highly consider. Hint number 4. Do you have one competency statement per page, and have you left any information out? Well, we have talked about competency statements needing to be comprehensive, and that's obvious. And I tell people, if you've got 25 competency statements, put them on 25 pages. It's easier for the instructor to read them, the evaluation committee to look at them. Plus, it spurs you on to provide the documentation that you need to expand your competency statements. So that's important. Expand it. Be sure that your competency statements are about 1 per page. This will be useful in the very end as you see things come to an end. Some of you, as you're doing that, you may want to go back to your articulation, the extra-institutional chapter, and see if there's anything you can pick up there that you wrote that you can expand on your competency statement. Some of you have probably forgotten that in the extra-institutional section you talked about some things, although they were talking about component skills. You had underlined your component skills, you had talked about your job, that maybe there were some things that you had picked up while you're writing there that you could go back and add to your competency statements. So hint number 4 is important because it, 1, spurs you on to a longer competency statement, a more comprehensive one, and 2, it goes ahead and shows you a cleaner situation. They're not all jammed together. We've received some papers before that the pages are so busy and they're so crushed together with the typing that it's hard to go ahead and see that. What you've done is just gone ahead and condensed it so much. I would rather see it in a more elongated form for those 2 reasons. So it is wise for you to do that and see these things in a little bit different perspective. Also, as you pull those out, if you're going to make corrections on the hard copy, it's easier for you to go back and make those corrections. So right now, you're in a correcting mode. You're trying to do the best you can. You're getting help from different quarters to do these things correctly. Now, I hope that all of you maintained electronic conversations with your instructor just to be sure that the instructor had an idea how you were doing. If you've had trouble, even here in the last several weeks, you've had some question that you're not sure of, be sure you email your instructor to be certain that you have the right idea. Remember that a card laid is a card played. We can't pull that card back. And much like when I was a little kid, all my cousins would play whatever the games were, and they would say, no, I'm not going to play that when they pull that back or whatever, and they won't do that. Well, it's too late in this kind of course. It's something that we have to deal with. We can only give you a limited time to finish the course. We want you to, at this point then, consider the competency statements with some examples that I want to provide. I think that might be useful to you. But I do want to say, none of the hints that we have are going to provide a guarantee that your statements represent your best skills. However, the hints I've just given you could enable you to effectively review your work and make your last-minute improvements. And I call it last-minute improvements. So we want these hints to drive your changes right now as you're making these changes, considering these things. Even some of you find it very helpful to read these out loud. And it sounds a little stilted or awkward when you read them, but I think it could help you. And some of you, as you read them, that's important because if they don't make a lot of sense to you, how are they going to make sense to the evaluator? Look for words that you left out, the, and a. Look for things you've left out in your writing, and that will help you a lot too in reference to your grade. Well, let's look at some samples. Let's go ahead and look at these samples. Again, we do not have all the format, but let's see what it says at this point. I can delegate authority to employees in the W.R. Young Manufacturing Company, allowing them to perform high-level tasks requiring company clearance. Well, how well do I do that? Well, that's good. Well enough to have delegated authorizations to over 100 employees in the past 5 years in highly sensitive areas of the company without issue, problem, or any breach of security or continuity. Well, let's see. What is this person saying that he or she can do? Well, the word that must be in the atomistic skills is delegate. So the person is saying, I can delegate authority. Now, hold 1 second as you're thinking about that. Some of you in your competency statements have actually changed the word on the job task analysis. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to use the same word. And if that's not the right word, go back and change it in the task analysis. So you don't want to put delegated, you want to put delegate. That should be the word in your job task analysis. So let's read it again. I can delegate authority to employees in the W.R. Young Manufacturing Company. Okay, which employees? Well, that's pretty clear. Which company? W.R. Young manufacturing company tells us that. Now, if it's any company, I could have said any company, but you're being very specific in this one, showing specific skills. Allowing them to perform high-level tasks requiring company clearance. So in other words, you're going to delegate some authority based on something to these manufacturing company employees of a particular company, and that'll allow them to perform high-level tasks, and this requires company clearance. So that's what you can do. So you have indicated that you are in a high-level position yourself, and you have a skill of delegation, and you know how to do that very effectively. Well, how well do you know how to do that? Well, you say that you can do this well enough to have delegated authorizations to over 100 employees in the past 5 years. So an average of 20 employees a year, you have given high-level clearances. It says in highly sensitive areas of the company, without issue, problem, or any breach of security or continuity. In other words, what you're saying is you have determined the employees to receive the high-level clearance. You have done this without issue, no problems, no breach of security or any continuity. So you've said that's what's happened. That's clear. You have not indicated in any way any problems. You've been able to do this. You've conducted this in a very effective manner. Now, if you'd won an award for your work or other types of measures, that's fine. But what you're saying is, this is a way I can tell the people how well I have been able to delegate authorizations. So you've told us what the skill is. You've told us how well you do the skill. Now, what do you have to have that's physical? Well, let's look at that. If I have security code access for W.R. Young's entire plant operations, copies of the code books, written authorization from the VP of Technology Support, software and hardware support, and at least 30 minutes with each person, delegated authority. All right, so what do we have to have? Well, I got to have all the code access myself. You know, I've got to be able to have that code access for the plant operations. So I've got to know that plant operation code that code access all the way across the line. I got to have copies of the code books. I've got to have written authorization for me to do this. So this has to be whoever's VP of Technology has given me permission to evaluate, operate, and to go ahead and delegate. The technology support, I've got to have software and hardware support. In other words, I can't just come up with something and go ahead and make those changes and authorization and nothing happens in the system, or the hardware won't support what I require to do. And I got to have at least 30 minutes with each person to tell them what they are authorized to do and be able to work with them on it. And whoever is going to be delegated that. So I've got to have all of these things and before that I can perform this skill of delegation. And so this is kind of important that I do this and I have this information. Well, what would I have to know to work with W.R. Young plant at this point? If I know W.R. Young's company regulations on secure codes release, I've surely got to know that because there's certain things that I have to do. The proper codes for entrance into all secure files, proper protocol for dealing with sensitive issues, such as, now notice I've put such as here. This is important because I can give a longer competency statement there. What are some of the proper protocol issues? Well, I could put such as, and I could expand my competency statements, and the identification techniques for determining if the code is being transferred to the correct individual. You know, you always have to determine the correct authorization. I'm transferring data, but I need to be sure it's going to Jim rather than Jill, or vice versa. And I know there has to be identification techniques, almost like the handshake. I've got to be sure that I am transferring the right information, I have the right protocol. And I could mention on identification techniques such as that I have to have verification. If I wanted to mention more on the regulations on secure codes release, I could put such as. So you can see on this knowledge base how easily I could expand it to improve on it to tell the reader that indeed this is very important that I have a high-level job here. So I've got the whole thing gone from what? I can, well enough, if I know. I've gone right through that, and my original competency statement is somewhat finished here that I showed you, but I showed where you could improve it. And that means that you can embellish all of your competency statements by making them more in tune with what's really going on in your organization. You can expand it, you can build it up, you can give it some type of more credibility than you had before if you do this. So this example takes the word, which atomistic skill delegate, and expanded that word and showed that when John Doe or Bill Doe delegates, that's not just some menial task, because delegation may involve a high-level task and transfer of authority during a particular time. When we have had presidents during the time when President Reagan had the requirement to transfer a power to the vice president during the time of his surgery, that was important because during that time the vice president had to have the secure codes required for nuclear retaliation. All of the different things that we know of in this type of operation are very complex. And so there are companies that have extremely complex operations, and they have created firewalls for protection against hackers, and they have done all kinds of things in different codes and decodings that they do to be able to transmit and receive information. And for me to have that information, for me to be able to take care of it, I must be knowledgeable and I must be a trusted individual. So anyway, you can go back over this one and look at some things that might be useful to you as you correct your competency statements. I'd like to take a look at a sample number 2, and we're going to use the word interview here. This is a very common word again here. But let's use it and see what we can come out with. Some of you interview as managers or whatever. I can interview potential professors for positions in occupational education at Texas State University, well enough to interview over 100 well-qualified professors for a tenure-track position in the last 10 years, and of those recommended, 100% were approved by the administration of Texas State University for hire. Okay, so my word is interview. That's my skill. I can interview potential professors, and I narrowed that down for a particular position. So if you can interview managers for IBM or Dell or USAA or US Air Force or whatever you're doing, you can interview individuals in that particular area. You can state what you're able to interview them for, and you can state for what organization that you're able to do that. That's important. Give it credibility that you can interview. And if there are more positions you want to talk about interviewing for, that's fine, but I have narrowed it down to a particular organization. I've narrowed the type of person that we're interviewing down. And you HR people may indicate that you can interview people from all positions from a particular company for a particular company employment. So you can do that. You can go ahead and make it as clear as you want, as broad. However, sometimes keeping it more narrow will enable us to enhance at least your credibility, because you can speak more to the issues rather than being, again, too general where it's harder to understand. Well, in order to determine how well you do that, we had stated that this competency statement says, well, you've interviewed 100 people in 10 years, which means there's not a lot of those kind of professors coming through. But the ones that you interviewed, you did this well enough that 100% were approved by the administration for hire. So in other words, your interviewing was very, very complex, apparently, the way you did that. So you indicated about how many that you had interviewed, and they were well qualified. You indicated that they were high-level people. And you did this in 10 years, and everything that you recommended, every single person that you recommended were approved for hire. Now, another thing a person could have done in this position, if they had interviewed somebody 10 years ago,